Wanna see you with it, sure could treat you right. Give me just a minute of your time tonight. We both are here to have fun, so let's
This is an engine that we're building for Mr. Johnson. I brought the head back. This thing sat, he got it from his aunt. I know it sat for a good while. Started right up and ran before he met us, but you know, eventually he wanted the engine pulled out and resealed because it was leaking oil on the head gasket. Right over here, this is your oil feed for the head that comes out of the block. And it was leaking right around this part. And you know, sometimes there's a chance that you break head bolts off in the block. We have it happen more often than not. I'd say it's about a 10 to 15% likelihood that that happens. And it's almost always on cars that sit for a while. Well, this was no exception. This one actually had 2 broken head bolts. And so at that point, like, look, you know, to do it right, machine them out, you gotta strip the whole block and just rebuild it, start over fresh, right? Well, I'm really glad that we did because, you know, you see how pitted this head is. This has just been cleaned from the machine shop, because I've got to do some welding to it. Now we do, you probably have noticed we do offer TIG welding services. This is just a training piece. Ryan, our product specialist, is now branching off into learning how to weld aluminum to give bow some relief. We do cylinder head repair. I've repaired a few myself personally, yeah, with really good results, but this one you can just see how much rot and corrosion. You know, this is one of the coolant jackets up front, #1 cylinder. You know, here's another one that it's just, everything is so heavily pitted that, you know, this is going to take a considerable amount of machining to get it true again. Primarily the main issue is this, and so I'm going to work on getting this cleaned up a little bit better sometime this week, and I'm hoping I can fill this whole area with aluminum, and then we have it milled back down flat, and we can save the cylinder head. This is an N42 head, so it's not like there's an overabundance of these on the street, so ideally we'd like to keep this for Mr. Johnson, so we don't have to source the cylinder head. Yeah, so that's something that I'll be working on this week, is getting the cylinder head welded, re-drilled where I welded, and then send it back to machining to get it milled flat. We got our cylinder head back from machining, where I made the repair here and here, and this thing's already been milled like 16 thousandths, and so we kind of just were like, you know, milling it anymore isn't really going to make a huge difference. I mean, this is like severely pitted, or was severely pitted, but it's good enough for me to move forward with it. But this material is also just absolutely filthy. I did everything I could to clean it up as best I could. I even ran a higher frequency on the welder to give it a little bit more cleaning action, and even still, you know, there's still just some minor pits that luckily we can kind of smooth this over a little bit with just a touch of sealant. It's kind of a controversial subject with head gaskets, but we've had really good luck in very rare circumstances like this where you've just got these little micro pits that you have to account for, and just a tiny application of sealant will usually help fill those voids. I mean, obviously you can't do it around a compression surface. You know, that's a huge no-no for sealant. It'll never hold. But when you've got these like micro pitting or some of these other issues, you can usually help fill in the gaps on a non-pressurized, you know, area. It's no different than sealing a water pump gasket or something with sealant. Like this area here is never going to see more than, you know, your coolant cap pressure. So what, 16, 18 psi? So, but, you know, for as severely pitted and corroded this head was, I'm pretty happy with that repair. So that one there, and this one here. And it being an N42 casting, these things are getting harder and harder to come by. So luckily for Mr. Johnson, his engine's going to live to fight another day. There's his engine block. I had 2 broken head studs on this one that we had machined out. Went ahead and had it decked as best as we could, and you know, same gig. It's just this thing sat for a really long time, and unfortunately, it didn't do the engine any favors.
This is Johnson's engine. Put this shit in the car already, bro.
That don't fit.
Put it in the car.
Gotta go trim more. bushing. Don't fit. Can't get nut. No nut.
No nut.
No nut.
Damn.
So quick tech tip for doing rack bushings in a 280Z R&R engine.
Take it out. So
Yeah?
So what?
You don't want y'all to... Bo comes up to me and says, I think the rack bushing straps are welded to the car.
Hey, whoa.
He says, I took the nuts out. I said, okay.
They had some extra nuts, that's one.
He started smashing on it. And the bolts are still in it. I said, hey, Bo.
That extra nut.
It comes apart a lot easier when you take the bolts out of the car.
All 4 of them.
Oops.
Oops.
Well, if you're looking for ideas for a proper heat shield with a Protunerz intake, this is made with Bo's bare hands
Took me all day.
with no gloves.
Started out with cardboard heat shields.
Well, that should definitely keep it from heat soaking
Oh yeah, no, I'm really happy with this.
and the heat burning the intake manifold like it does.
It probably will.
Well, no, like if it didn't have a heat shield. Because remember all the other...
Yes.
We've installed like what, 3 or 4 of these now? And they all come back later on with like the anodizing burned off.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, imagine that, you know, a part sandwiched next to something hot needs a heat shield.
What's up, guys? Back to the vlog. You know, we got Mr. Johnson's engine here. We got it stabbed in. It's almost ready to go.
Only took us 2 hours. It's like an episode of West Coast Customs. They built a whole car in 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's all it takes.
Oh, you already took the airflow meter out?
I took it out. I was getting
Okay.
ideas.
Sucks that we powder coated that bracket. That
Yeah.
we're not gonna, well, I guess we can use it, just we'll relocate it elsewhere. Or we're gonna have to extend the harness?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have to extend the throttle sensor.
Right.
Extend that one. But I have ideas for how to mount everything.
Yeah. Shove it in that hole real quick so we can show how
Shove it in the hole.
how it's no worky.
So this is how it would bolt, like that. Right there. That's factory.
So if you're running the Protunerz intake with factory EFI, just be prepared to be doing a lot of fab work or paying somebody to do it. So, but yeah, I think putting it under here is going to make it look a lot cleaner.
Yeah. So I can use these 2 mounting holes.
Mm-hmm.
And do like this.
Yeah.
Roughly. And then 245s.
Those are just the stainless ones?
These are stainless. I was just getting them for the angles, and they're the right size. So.
Oh, cool. We can use the discontinued LS400
That's what I was
tubing.
gonna recommend.
Wait, is it? No, that's 3. Is that 3 or
they're
3 1/4?
They're 3. The first gen is 3 1/4.
Oh, right.
The regular one is 3.
Okay.
So 245s.
Yeah.
And probably a 90-degree coupler will be right there for that airflow meter.
Okay.
And this right here, it'll be right there. And just put the filter and stuff over there.
Yeah, that'll get the job done. So, you're gonna have to look upstairs for this switch. They're discontinued.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, it's looking good.
There is this nipple right here. Don't know what
Yeah,
it's gonna go to that.
It's the vacuum source because it's an LS style throttle body.
So
On the LS motors, that goes to the valve cover, if I remember right, for the PCV valve.
Okay.
So yeah, that needs to get
Cap it.
Yeah, it needs to be capped.
Okay. And there's also another hole right here.
What do you mean?
It's threaded, but there's another opening right here.
Oh, probably needs to be plugged.
Plug.
So look in the throttle body. There's 2 ports, vacuum
Yeah.
ports.
Yep.
Well, one's for the IAC. This one should go to, or maybe this is the fresh air source for the IAC. And this is threaded. Yeah. Well, hell, when we start up, let's just see what has vacuum and what doesn't.
Yeah.
We got to relocate the ignition coil hardware. We'll probably actually stick it here now that all this factory coil bolts here and it was hitting the throttle cable pulley. So we're going to fix that. We're going to convert it to a 16-inch, like 2500 CFM electric fan from Spal. So we're waiting on that. And in fact, I actually forgot. He called me earlier. I gotta go call him and talk to him. But I'm pretty sure he approved everything. But yeah, it's coming along. Just did our first heat cycle on this thing. This is whistling like hell. I was on Church of L series, and apparently the idle air control port whistles really bad because it's supposed to have an idle air control and not a block-off plate, but factory EFI problems.
I'm telling you, it sounds like one of those twirly tubes. I forgot.
Yeah.
I don't, whirly durlies or whatever. No. Twirly whirlies.
I'm too young for that. I don't know.
Yeah, of course.
So what we think is happening is this didn't come with an O-ring, and it goes in that bore.
Switch my tool back.
So we're gonna put an O-ring on it, but what I was reading on Church of L is these edges here are really sharp, just poor quality machining. So, so we're gonna chamfer them per somebody's recommendation and see between that, putting an O-ring around this, which wasn't supplied, see if it fixes the noise, and go from there. I will say if you actually put a idle air control valve in one of these, like even if it's just a dead one, then it doesn't make that noise. So it's got to be something to do with all this. So after a bunch of trial and error, talking back and forth with the customer, we came to the conclusion that trying to band-aid the factory EFI system with the Protunerz intake was just barking up the wrong tree. And I didn't feel right charging him over and over for making adjustments and screwing with it, you know, trying different things. I speculate that you could probably put turbo injectors on an NA to richen up the mixture. It would probably be pretty close, but we have this thing jacked up at like 70 psi of fuel pressure. It's just not supplying enough fuel for this intake manifold. It just uses a lot more air. And so he finally bit the bullet and agreed to buy a Mega Squirt. He bought one during our Black Friday sale. It's actually finished. I think all it has to do is get tested on our test engine, and then it's ready to get installed. I wanted to have it installed this week before we left, but I got super behind on a 280ZX turbo exhaust and forgot. So that's what Bo's working on now. But yeah, should you run a Protunerz intake with the factory EFI? No, you should not. Can it work? Possibly. If it was my car, you know, I probably could have messed with it with enough time and got it working okay, but this is a paying customer, you know, time is money, and it just wasn't going to be fair to him to keep charging him by the hour to play with this thing and make adjustments and get it right when we know the solution that he's going to be happier with anyways is a Mega Squirt. It's fully tunable. You don't have to screw with any of that stuff. If you're going to be doing a Protunerz intake on factory EFI, tread very lightly. There's an immediate issue with clearance. Still no heat shield. You've got to relocate the airflow meter. You've got to relocate the ignition coil. You got to do all these little things, right? And then you lose out on the factory function. The factory EFI is designed to work with the auxiliary air controller, the cold start valve, all these different control devices. And you don't get to retain any of that with a Protunerz intake. It's not to say that it's not a nice part and that it isn't going to give you better performance, but it's just not, doesn't play well with factory EFI, so I would not recommend it. So if you're going to do that, tread lightly, be prepared to be frustrated. Maybe somebody else figured it out, but you know, that's on them. At the end of the day, this is not like a modern car where you can take a performance part, do a quick flash tune, and make it work like OEM. So if you want OEM, keep OEM parts. If you want performance, buy performance parts.
All right, so this is actual progress over here. This is what progress looks like.
We got the cylinder head back this morning.
Got the cylinder head back this morning.
It's like 3 o'clock.
It's gonna go room today.
I don't know about
Look at the
today.
fuel system.
I mean, I kind of could today. Yeah.
I watch you put coolant in it, and it's just gonna.
Leaks coolant again through the head. This is a different head though. This is a new head. Head?
Yep. Mr. Johnson has a new N47 head instead of the N42 that was on the car. Because the N42 head was bad.
It was very corroded.
Very bad. Very corroded.
We tried to save it, but
Yeah, Chris can splice in a pic. I don't know where the old head is, but
yeah, we
there
have
was
a
a giant
picture.
hole in the coolant passage.
Yeah, this coolant passage, like right here.
Yeah, that one. So, that was fun.
And we didn't know until we took it apart.
Update on Mr. Johnson's. So the cylinder head that we repaired just didn't take. And what was going on was when we got the cylinder head torqued down, the weld area would crack, even though you saw on the video that I really took out as much material as I could to start over fresh, cleaned it up really well, and it just wasn't holding. And so what was happening is I had, we got the engine through a couple of heat cycles, and Bo was checking the valve clearance, and we were seeing coolant weep out of this head stud, which was really weird. So I had him pull the stud, and we could see coolant actively leaking out of it, so we pulled the head back off. And it's really hard to see on camera. I don't know how this is going to look to you guys, but there's a little microscopic crack that is forming, and it was only there once we torqued the head down. So I pulled the head back off, I cleaned it up, I re-welded it, except this time I welded it solid because I figure that we normally plug these off in the engine block anyways. It's just a thermostat bypass hole. So I welded it solid, and I had them machine it down again, but one of the previous weld areas that I repaired was starting to flake away, because every time you weld to it, you have to take just that much more material off. And so when this started happening, and we already saw this weld starting to crack again, I was like, man, we just need to call it. So as much as we tried to save the head, it just wasn't feasible. And it wasn't going to be good for the customer to keep taking it apart, trying to machine it down, and just throwing money and time at a problem that the head was just too far gone. This thing was severely corroded. So luckily I had an N47 head in stock, which is not ideal. Same compression, slightly different combustion chamber design, and it has the exhaust liners, but this is just an NA, with some bolt-ons, nothing fancy. He's never going to be running boost through it. So we rebuilt a N47 head for him. I told him I would cover the labor to swap and the machining cost, just buy the head off of me. So we did all that, and now it's been running and driving, and we're just tuning it now. We'll talk more about it in next month's vlog. For now, this is at least to just kind of give you an informational update on what was going on with Mr. Johnson's. And then Johnson's, his is finally running with the replacement cylinder head. We ended up putting an N47 in it, just what I had on the shelf. And so it's running, not leaking coolant anymore, just waiting for me to wash it and then tune it. We're doing the final inspection on Mr. Johnson today. We've got a... Yeah, you can hear that Protunerz throttle body is still whistling. So we've got about 120, 130 miles on this engine, I think, right? Something like that. I have to look at the odometer.
It's a little over 100.
Gotcha. So this one is pretty much ready to go home. He's looking to pick up tomorrow. So we tried chamfering the holes in that throttle body twice, and we got the whistle to go away at idle, but now it's like, we think about 1500 RPM, it's like the most pronounced.
Oh yeah, it's bad.
I still gotta adjust the cold idler before it leaves. Alright, kill it. Yeah, because it's still rich.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we chamfered the holes twice based off of what we saw on, I think it's Church of L series, and Protunerz actually suggested that directly, but we had already gotten to that point. So apparently this was affected by a recall where it was sucking air through the throttle shaft seal. So we replaced it in the pedestal, still there. So at this point, you know, we didn't provide this part, the customer did, so we're gonna lean on him to reach out to Protunerz and have them make it right. But you know, maybe we'll launch a subsequent update when the vehicle's here for its 500-mile checkup. But as of right now, it's leaving with that really annoying whistle. And in our opinion, just needs a different throttle body. This throttle body is 99.9% identical to an LS1 style throttle body. Will you grab that LS throttle body off the shelf? So, we sent Jackson to Summit Racing to pick it up yesterday, hoping that the bolt pattern was going to be the same. So pretty much everything on that throttle body, other than the Protunerz logo, is identical to the LS style throttle body that goes on like your fast intakes and all that. I mean, same idle air control port, same pedestal for the throttle position sensor, the vent tube, all that. But the bolt pattern was different. And that's the smallest one we could find, was 92 millimeter. So yeah, unfortunately, we can't even swap it with an off-the-shelf part because of the bolt pattern. So pretty much the only option is Mr. Johnson needs to reach out to Protunerz and see if they'll make it right. And you know, we're non-partial to this whole thing. We install a lot of these. This is the only one we've ever had that whistles. And we'll continue to install them, but yeah, we'll circle back on whether he got Mr. Johnson taken care of or not. Mr. Johnson's car is going home today. We finally finished the last, we do a paint marker inspection where everything that we touch gets verified, marked with a paint marker. We do one final once-over of the tune from cold start all the way to warm-up, so we got that done. Did a final road test. So and then I'm getting ready to do one final rinse, and then he's going to pick up this afternoon. Just to kind of recap some of this stuff with the you know, he supplied his Protunerz intake, and so, you know, typically when it comes to our builds, you know, anything that we supply, we cover for a 1 year, 12,000 mile warranty. And there are some exclusions, you know, we have warranty exclusions, like, you know, you can't tamper with it, you can't take it to another shop without consulting with us first, things like that. But, you know, he supplied his own intake manifold, so, you know, it's unfortunate that, you know, Protunerz did send him a fixed kit for, I guess what they have as a recall with where the manufacturer didn't put the seal in correctly or something around the throttle shaft. So we did that, didn't fix it. One of the other things that we saw on Church of L series was somebody chamfered the inlet holes around the idle air control port on the underside and the PCV vent tube. So we tried chamfering those, and it quit whistling at idle, but it changed where it whistles in the RPM range. So we tried one more time, and it just changed where it comes in. And so, you know, it still whistles real bad. And so, you know, we don't really have a leg in this fight because we didn't provide the part. So this is, you know, this is just going to have to be one of those things between Protunerz and the customer. I'm confident that he'll get him taken care of. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't. So we're going to recap back once we hear back from Mr. Johnson on how that whole thing was handled. But, you know, in our opinion, it needs another throttle body. You shouldn't have to chamfer it to get it to not whistle. If it whistles, there's a problem. So, in our minds, really what needs to happen is he just needs another throttle body that doesn't have that issue. On the Protunerz intake on the factory EFI, so this was actually the first one we installed with factory-style injectors and barb-style rail. And one thing to note, we ran into this issue. I don't know if anybody else has, or maybe they haven't noticed it, but the bores are a lot deeper on this intake manifold flange because they're technically meant for EV6 or round O-ring style injectors that seal against the outer diameter of the bore. Where the factory injectors, it's a square cut O-ring, and it's actually meant to seal against the face of the intake flange, not the inner diameter of the bore. This intake manifold flange is designed for EV6 injectors or O-ring style, 14mm O-ring style, which seals against the inner diameter of the bore with a round cut O-ring. And the factory injectors are a square cut O-ring, which are designed to seal against the face of the intake manifold flange, not the inner diameter of the bore. So because these bores are deeper, what ended up happening is we had a vacuum leak at all 6 injectors, so we actually had to double stack square cut O-rings to get it to not leak. And we verified it with a smoke tester, and one way you can kind of cheat it sometimes is you can spray brake clean or carburetor cleaner over where you think there's going to be an intake leak. And if the engine smooths out or the RPMs change or whatever, if it does any kind of behavioral change, that's where you have a vacuum leak. And so we could not get the factory injectors to seal against the face of the flange with 1 O-ring on each injector. So we put 2 in, sealed that up. I don't remember at this point if we could have possibly put round cut O-rings, but these are not designed to have captured O-rings. So, they could slide off or whatever. It's just not right. So if you're installing these with factory injectors, you may want to keep an eye open for that. You may have to double stack an additional set of square cut O-rings. The other thing to note is we really tried to get the factory EFI working with this setup, and we had it running, but it was really, really lazy. It ran really, really lean. There's a couple of different ways you can cheat it. We tried raising the base fuel pressure to about 60-65 pounds, which on a naturally aspirated car, you can do that because you're not going to have boost increasing the fuel pressure. So it would stay effectively static at 60 psi. So, all injector flow rates are measured at 43.5 psi. So as you increase pressure, flow rate increases. So we tried to cheat it like that. We tried adjusting the airflow meter out to enrichen it, and it just wasn't happening. And so, at a certain point, it no longer becomes cost-effective to the customer because we can't, in good conscience, continue to charge him, especially by the hour, to adjust out something like this that really isn't going to be right at the end of the day and he's not going to be happy with. So we put our plug-and-play Megasquirt kit in it. This is the drop-in kit it's actually our most popular Megasquirt kit to date. It comes with the LS2 multi-coil spark ignition package. Comes with the drop-in crank angle sensor, which actually we just recently started doing laser engraving on all of our billet pieces that we powder coat. So it looks a lot nicer, and it's the updated logo. And so once we put the Megasquirt on and we're able to tune it, it started running amazing. And I can actually, I'll show you on the fueling maps. So these are just example maps of when we were doing the base tune. These are not reflective of the final tune by any means, but here's an OEM setup here, factory intake manifold, factory engine, and then here's the map for a basically relatively same setup, stock compression, stock cam, OE spec motor with a Protunerz intake, and you can see just how much additional fueling we had to put in. So, I would say that's proof that this intake does allow the engine to ingest more air. Overall, this feels torquier with this intake setup. It definitely has a lot more mid-range. I'd say, just butt dyno, the top end is definitely there too. I mean, it's not anything to write home about, but it is a really beautiful intake manifold. And so there's an argument to be made that it may give you a little bit of a horsepower increase. It may not necessarily give you a huge peak horsepower increase, but it definitely will improve the bottom end, snap throttle response and the mid-range for sure. That is not debatable. It definitely improves. So if he can just work out the final details with the whistling throttle body, he'll be good to go. The other thing to note, if you're installing one of these, we fabricated a heat shield because these things heat soak real bad. They actually get hot enough to where the anodizing will fade. We've seen it across a few different setups that we've done. So if we ever, anytime we install one of these in house, we automatically will build a heat shield for it, just to cut down on the heat. So because he is running a header, what we did is we just welded studs to each runner, and then built a custom shield out of sheet aluminum that we keep in stock, and then put textured black powder coat on it, and it's held up to the heat so far. We've got about almost 150 miles on this engine with this setup, running and driving, and it's been doing great. If you're wondering, should you do the Protunerz intake with factory EFI, I would say as a professional, no. It's a aftermarket part that's a performance-oriented part. It's meant for a performance-oriented vehicle. Can you do it? Yes. Should you? In my opinion, no. I think the right way to do it is to pair it with a tunable standalone ECU to really reap the benefits. I think the drawbacks far outweigh the benefits of using this with factory EFI. And from what I've been able to determine on Instagram, there are a few other people who have presumably gotten this running with the factory EFI system. I haven't personally driven them or spoken to those people. So I don't know how well or how poorly it does, but this has been our experience here at GRW, the first attempt to do this with factory EFI. I just won't even consider it an option for any customers moving forward. There's just too much trouble involved. It's not right. It's not up to our standards that we like to uphold here. Because ultimately, for what you spend with us, we want you to be 100% happy with, the way the car turns out. Not 90% happy, not 75% happy. We want you 100% happy. And so in order to do that, we have to do it right. And so again, our opinion at GRW is the right way to do a Protunerz intake is to do some type of tunable aftermarket EFI system. You can see Mr. Johnson is back. He's back for his 500-mile checkup for his engine build. And it being summer, he wants a properly functioning air conditioning system. So we're getting ready to put a vintage air system in this. We got all the parts here. We're just gonna work it into the schedule probably early next week. So this is gonna be getting a modern vintage air system. This one's on its way to getting wrapped up. So on these vintage air systems, if you're doing a OEM-ish setup, something to keep in mind is a lot of the times the factory pressure sensor will either leak or not work or whatever. We still have yet to find a decent pressure sensor. So we adapted an OEM one from a different model, and we had to JB weld the fitting into the dryer to get it to not leak. But so far it blows cold. Caleb's working on getting the fan wired to when the compressor comes on. The fan comes on so you get good AC condenser airflow. We're warrantying this because the guy that used to work here that powder coated this did it wrong, and it had a really bad reaction. So we're coating a completely new valve cover, which is over here. Looks really good. Yeah, it looks a lot better. Alrighty, we're getting Mr. Johnson's wrapped up, and we did a vintage air system this visit. This visit also consisted of the 100-mile checkup. We drained the oil, cut the filter open, inspected it. Actually, this was the 500-mile checkup. We drained the oil, inspected it, cut the filter open, just verify our work with the engine build. All looks good there. We warrantied the powder coating on the valve cover, the one that was on the car. I guess it had some corrosion built up on the aluminum. Even though we cleaned it as best we could, it had a weird reaction, and it started flaking away real bad, so we replaced that for him. I just powder coated it, or I had Christian powder coat another valve cover. So that's on there. Now, you may remember that we talked about the hellacious whistling noise that this Protunerz throttle body made. Now, just for a quick recap, Protunerz sent out a quote-unquote fix kit that replaced the seal behind the throttle position sensor. That didn't fix it. So, we felt the only option really was to just get another throttle body. If supposedly he had some revised throttle bodies, so he eventually got Protunerz to send him another throttle body, and He installed that and the whistle was still there. So from what the customer told me, I think he said that at that point they were really hard to get a hold of for a solution and he never really got made whole. Again, just disclaimer, I'm just telling you guys what the customer told me. I don't have an official opinion on this matter because it's not my business. But what the customer ended up doing is inside this throttle body there's a PCV port and a idle air control valve port, and we tried radiusing those and giving it something of a chamfer to alleviate some of that whistling noise, and it alleviated some of it, but it changed the tone and it also changed where it would come in. So he ended up filling that with epoxy, which is something that got brought up in conversation when the car was originally with us, but we didn't want to do that because what'll happen, or what could happen, we hope it doesn't, but if that epoxy ever breaks loose, it gets ingested by the engine, and then now you just bent a valve or punched a hole in the piston or whatever. And so since that was a potential failure point, you know, we can't stand behind that type of repair. So it wasn't on the table for us, but, you know, customer chose to do that on his own accord. So, you know, that's his choice. But it fixed his whistle, so the car doesn't whistle anymore. So, for any of y'all that are going to be doing these vintage air systems, just keep in mind, window tint really helps these cars. This hot black dash will absorb heat. It's been 100-something degrees every day this week. The system is working as efficiently as it can. If you hold your hands over the vent, ice cold, ice cold, ice cold. But you get about here and you start to get all this UV and heat coming into the cabin, which doesn't help. And, you know, these factory vents are okay, but they don't flow air like a normal or like a new vehicle. So just keep that in mind so you have realistic expectations of what to expect, especially in super hot climates. But I guarantee you get down to about 90 degrees, this system will freeze you out. So what I would recommend if you're going to be doing these systems is get UV tint for the front that has like 90-something% heat rejection properties. Same with the ceramic tint on the side and the rear windows. This is a giant fishbowl. So anything that you can do to alleviate the amount of heat and UV rays entering the cabin is really going to help cool this cabin off. So we finally got these plates, these radial plates, laser cut to make this more of a direct bolt-in experience. So, all right, we're going to do a little drive around with Mr. Johnson's car. That's what I was talking about, that whistle. But yeah, one of the key things that I notice every time we do one of these Protunerz intakes, it's not really prevalent on turbo setups because you've got the turbo, you're just making gobs more power, but naturally aspirated, it's a lot easier to pick up on subtle changes like head porting, a cam, or an intake manifold. And this thing definitely has improved mid-range and probably some top end too. I'd have to look at a dyno to tell you for sure. But this thing does ride quite nice for having big wheels and all that. It's still factory OE replacement shocks. Sorry guys, don't mind the whistle. It is kind of fun if you want to be a degenerate. In all the different road testing and tuning and engine braking we've been doing, I have to admit, I know for a fact, Bo, Caleb, and I have all been a little bit of a degenerate here and there. Also, don't mind the rattling in the rear. He took the skillered rear diffuser off. He decided it just didn't fit the look of the car. So I've got it in the back and it may rattle. The other thing with the Protunerz intake, and you know, we built our custom cold air intake with it as well, the 3-inch one that we sell on our website for naturally aspirated vehicles. We do offer a charge pipe that works with the Protunerz intake. But this intake manifold does make a nice induction sound. It's not quite at the level of individual throttle bodies, but it does have a good sound to it when you have a quieter exhaust. He's got a 3-to-2 header to a 2.5-inch pipe all the way back. He does have a MagnaFlow muffler in the rear, and then there's a MagnaFlow resonator. Between all that stuff, it has a nice manageable exhaust note, so you can pick up on induction noise. Pretty nice sound to it. Nice and manageable, other than that whistle. God, that's annoying, but this guy's got his window down next to me. You know, think about the only thing this car really lacks is it could really use a cam. I mean, it still runs really well, factory cam. And had we known that we were going to be fully rebuilding the engine, we would have made a point. Let me rephrase that. Had we known that during the rebuild process we would have been doing a standalone ECU and a Protunerz intake eventually, we would have opted for some higher compression pistons and you know, a cam. This thing could really benefit from a cam. A nice Lopi, you know, 292F from Schneider, which is kind of our standard procedure for any of our naturally aspirated builds. It's still a very streetable cam, but it's radical. When he brought it to us in April of last year, the initial plan was to do an engine reseal because it had been leaking from the head gasket for a while. And he was finally ready to address all that. And so, on some of these engines especially, it seems to be really prevalent from like 75 to 79. I don't really have this. That nice induction noise. Anyways, from 75 to 79, maybe even 1980. It's specifically the N42 blocks. I have yet to see this happen to a P79 or a F54 block. The head gasket starts to corrode, and it allows a little bit of water to get in around the head bolts, and seeps into the threads. And between the heat, the electrolysis that happens in cooling systems, especially when you don't flush them or you let them sit, things like that, it corrodes them solid, and a lot of the times these head studs will break, or these head bolts will break. And I've had it happen, I'd say about 10% of L engines that we build will break studs off or bolts off in the block. And so when that happens, you basically have to tear the whole thing down. To do it right, you have to tear the whole thing down to machine it. Some people have gotten away with welding nuts to them. Some people will even go as far as to try to drill them out. We don't do any of that. We do it one way, and that's the right way. So we pull the engine out, we strip it down, off it goes to the machine shop, and they'll chuck it up in their Bridgeport end mill and machine it out properly so that we don't risk any damage to the engine block. And so at the time, we were just going to do an OE spec, right? We were going to do, let's just put it back to OEM standards, factory fuel injection, all that. And so once we had picked the parts and started doing the machine work, that was the direction we were going in. Somewhere along the way, it could have been a Black Friday deal. He picked up that Protunerz intake. And so we were like, well, we'll try to make it work with the factory fuel injection, no promises. But by then we had already decided on the pistons, the machine work, all that. And even then, we were still trying to maintain the factory EFI system. Had we known that we were eventually going to just be throwing a Megasquirt in it anyways, we probably would have had the conversation for higher compression and a cam. But at the end of the day, it's still a really nice running car. Runs way better than factory. Mr. Johnson's happy with it. He actually went on a road test with us a couple of weeks ago before we did some of the finishing touches, and he was ecstatic about it. You know, he hasn't driven this thing in a year between the backlog for the engine build and all the other things that contribute to that kind of a lead time. So he's really, really excited to be picking this thing up today and taking it home and enjoying car season. But who knows, maybe again in the future we'll consider doing a cam and a couple of other goodies. As with most car enthusiasts, eventually your car starts to feel slow and you want more. So we'll see how it goes. He may decide he wants more power, and we'll be there to make it happen. So. It really is a good sounding engine and exhaust setup. Not too loud, it's not too quiet, it's got a good tone to it, isn't raspy. Guy in a Chevy truck just gave us a thumbs up. So, this car does get a ton of compliments. We have people stop. God. We have people stop in all the time, and they'll stop right in their tracks and take a look at this car. Existing clients, parts delivery drivers, visitors. It does have a very unique look to it, and I really think it's the wheels that set it off. I mean, it's a beautiful color. The interior is phenomenal, but the wheel setup is, in my opinion, reminiscent of a Chip Foose style build. And so I grew up watching overhauling on Discovery Channel and other shows like Monster Garage and West Coast Customs, things like that. And so this kind of has that aura to it, in my opinion. I think it's reminiscent of some Chip Foose styling. You know, beautiful metallic or candy paint, wood grain interior parts, nice leather, the retro cladding on the door panels, and then big billet wheels. And I would imagine that Forgiato was a good supplier for Chip Foose back in the day, or currently, I don't know. It's actually been a while since I've checked in on what Chip Foose is doing, but you know, the car does remind me of something you would see at a Chip Foose's garage. So, and if that's not your style, that's cool. Everybody has their own taste. But we're gonna wrap this thing up. We're gonna get it back to the shop and ready for Mr. Johnson to take delivery.